John, what'd you think of Rousey?
She was unbelievable. She was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah. Do you want to see her keep going, or what do you think?
I don't know if she will, but...
Gina, I just want to say an honor to call you right after 17 years waiting. What an inspiration you are. God bless you. Glenn, good to see you again, sir. Good to see you.
Yeah, you know, Gina's a warrior. We want to see more. We want to see more from Ronda. And yeah, as a fan, it's bittersweet, right? She comes in with the armbar and finishes it really fast. It's historic. That's her signature move. Takes it to the ground. But I also would have loved to see them standing up, engaging in the fight. But this is the fight world. You never know what's going to happen.
Textbook Olympian style. There was no lights, no camera, no action. Straight to the point. Exactly how we thought it was going to. Good job, Ronda. Good job, Gina. Mike and Diaz, same thing.
Finished in 25 seconds.
We already knew this.
17 seconds.
But we're gonna knew this. Like Gina 17 years on fighting. This is a peak the Ronda Rousey choose. So just to say.
Cyborg earlier. Do you want to see Ronda versus Cyborg? What do you think?
I don't want to see Ronda Rousey fight for the team. I'm good on that. We all know Chris Cyborg is on steroids. We all know that. He's been on it. He never got off.
From Ronda Rousey tonight.
Man, she was amazing. She did some finish. We all know that, but it was like a perfect fight.
Right.
Like everything went perfect. Hit the shot right away, right to the armbar. She has an amazing armbar, you know, and I'm very critical of technique, but I would say for a girl on top of it, that shit is legit. Like it's better than almost all the men's armbars. I like Gina, so I'm friends with her, friends both of them. So, but Ronda, A plus.
The fantasy matchup between Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano is one of the most debated what-if fights in women's combat sports history, not because it actually happened, but because it represents two completely different eras colliding in one imagined cage. Gina Carano represents the early foundation of women's MMA, where fighters relied heavily on boxing, kickboxing, toughness, and raw athletic instinct to build the sport before it had the structure and depth it has today. Ronda Rousey, on the other hand, represents the explosive rise of women's MMA into the mainstream UFC era, where elite grappling, specifically judo-based dominance and submission finishing, changed how fights were controlled and ended at the highest level. When analyzing this matchup technically, the most important factor that immediately stands out is the grappling gap, and this is where Ronda Rousey's entire career identity becomes the central storyline. Rousey was not just a good grappler, she was a specialist built around one of the most dominant judo-based clinch and submission systems in MMA history. Her strategy was simple but extremely effective: close distance aggressively, force clinch exchanges, use throws or trips to bring the fight to the ground, and immediately transition into armbar attempts with frightening speed. Once she locked in control, most of her opponents had very little time to react, which is why so many of her early fights ended in under a minute. That kind of explosive grappling pressure creates a very specific problem for any striker-based fighter who is not fully prepared for elite-level takedown chains and submission threats. Gina Carano, however, brings a completely different skill set into this fantasy matchup, and that is what makes the debate interesting rather than one-sided. Carano was known for her clean striking fundamentals, strong composure under pressure, and ability to control the pace of stand-up exchanges during her prime. She fought in an era where women's MMA was still developing, but she stood out as one of the most technically sound strikers of her time, using combinations, movement, and timing to overwhelm opponents who were often less polished. In a striking-only scenario, Carano's boxing and kickboxing experience would likely allow her to control distance, land cleaner combinations, and avoid getting drawn into chaotic exchanges where grapplers thrive. The biggest turning point in this theoretical matchup comes down to whether Carano can consistently defend takedown entries and keep the fight standing long enough to impose her striking advantage. Against most opponents in her era, Carano was able to manage range and avoid extended grappling exchanges, but Rousey represents a very different kind of pressure, one that does not rely on long setups or slow grinding takedowns. Instead, Rousey's entries were fast, explosive, and often came immediately after forcing opponents to retreat under pressure. This means Carano would have very little time to reset or breathe once Rousey decided to close the distance, making defensive awareness and footwork absolutely critical from the opening seconds. As the fight progresses, the dynamic becomes even more difficult for Carano because Rousey's grappling threat does not decrease over time, it often increases as opponents begin to hesitate. Even the awareness of a possible clinch can disrupt striking rhythm, forcing fighters to become more cautious, less aggressive, and more defensive in their output. This is exactly the kind of psychological pressure Rousey used to her advantage throughout her prime, because she did not need constant striking exchanges to win fights, she only needed one clean entry to completely change the position of the fight and move directly into her submission system. On the other hand, if Carano manages to maintain distance and keep the fight in a pure striking environment, she absolutely has the tools to make it competitive. Her ability to read timing, land combinations, and avoid wild exchanges would give her a real chance to accumulate damage over time, especially in early rounds where grappling fatigue has not yet become a factor. In that scenario, the fight becomes more tactical, with Carano trying to pick shots from range while Rousey looks for openings to crash forward and clinch. However, the longer the fight plays out, the more opportunities Rousey would typically find to close distance, especially as opponents begin to slow down or become hesitant due to the constant threat of a takedown. Once Rousey gets a clinch, the entire fight shifts dramatically, because her ability to transition from standing control into ground dominance is where she historically overwhelmed even experienced fighters. From top position, her submission timing and control were extremely difficult to escape, especially in her prime years when her reaction speed and positional awareness were at their peak. In terms of prediction, most realistic breakdowns would still lean toward Ronda Rousey as the likely winner, primarily due to the sheer effectiveness of her grappling system and how quickly she was able to finish fights once she established control. While Gina Carano certainly has the striking ability and composure to make the early stages competitive, the key problem is the constant threat of being taken down or clinched, which forces her into a more defensive mindset and reduces her offensive output over time. Overall, this fantasy matchup is best understood as a clash of eras and styles, where Carano represents the striking heavy pioneer phase of women's MMA, and Rousey represents the grappling revolution that changed how fights were finished at the highest level. And when those two identities collide, the most consistent and realistic prediction still points toward Rousey finding the clinch, dragging the fight into her strongest area, and ultimately securing a submission finish once control is established on the ground. One realistic alternate outcome in this fantasy matchup is Gina Carano managing to control the fight long enough on the feet to pull off an upset decision win. If Carano is able to maintain distance early, use lateral movement, and consistently punish Rousey as she tries to close the gap, she could slowly build momentum through clean boxing combinations and body shots. In this version of the fight, Rousey's entries become more predictable as she absorbs damage trying to clinch, and Carano's accuracy begins to accumulate rounds. Over time, if Rousey fails to secure takedowns or clinch control, Carano could frustrate her into a slower pace and potentially win a competitive decision based on striking volume and control of range. Another very possible scenario is a fast and explosive finish from Ronda Rousey, where she closes distance immediately and does not allow Carano to establish any striking rhythm. In this version, Rousey pressures aggressively from the opening seconds, forcing Carano backward and cutting off the cage quickly before she can settle into her boxing. A single successful clinch could lead to a rapid throw or trip, and once the fight hits the ground, Rousey's armbar system becomes extremely difficult to escape. This outcome would mirror many of Rousey's prime performances, where the fight ends in under a minute due to overwhelming grappling dominance and immediate positional control. A more balanced prediction sees Gina Carano having strong success in the early rounds, using sharp striking, movement, and defensive awareness to keep Rousey at range for a significant period of time. However, as the fight progresses, Rousey's pressure and constant forward movement begin to close the distance more effectively, especially as Carano's output slightly slows. Eventually, a clinch exchange near the cage could shift the momentum completely, allowing Rousey to secure a takedown and transition into dominant top position. From there, the submission threat becomes overwhelming, leading to a late armbar finish after Carano has already been forced to defend multiple grappling exchanges. In a less common but still possible scenario, Carano defends enough takedowns to avoid being finished, but not enough to fully dominate the striking. The fight becomes a messy, physical battle along the fence, with Rousey constantly hunting clinches and Carano working to break free and reset. While Carano lands some clean shots in space, Rousey's control time in clinch positions and occasional takedown attempts may be enough to sway rounds. In this case, Rousey could win a gritty decision based on pressure, cage control, and grappling attempts, even without securing a clean submission finish.